All right. Therefore, to be an adept, as we have before hinted, is to know thyself, fear God, and love thy neighbor as thyself. And by this thou shalt come to the fulfillment of the desires, O man, by no other means under the scope of heaven. Why thy soul shall be made drunk with the divine ambrosial nectar, then shall thy understanding be more clear than the noontide sun. Then, by thy strong and spiritualized intellectual eye, shalt thou see into the great treasury of nature, and thou shalt praise God with thy whole heart. When wilt thou see the folly of the world, and thou shalt unerringly accomplish thy desires, and shalt possess the true philosopher's stone to the profit of thy neighbor. I say, thou shalt visibly and sensibly, according to the corporal faculties, not imaginary or delusively, but real. Helmont, an author of no mean repute, avouches that he had actually seen the stone which converts base metals into gold, that he had seen it with his eyes and handled it with his fingers, taken from his own relation of the fact, notwithstanding Kircher's declamation against the possibility of obtaining it, noting them all who professed alchemy to be a set of impostors and jugglers, giving no better an exposition of their process of transmutation than this. An alchemist, says Kircher, procures or desires a crucible to be brought, wherein is put lead or any other base metal, which, while in session, he, the alchemist, stirs about with an iron rod, and then he says, he drops in from between his fingers a bit of gold, and after stirring up for some time, and easy being made, gold is found. This is indeed a very lame method of exploding alchemy. But, however, to leave Kircher as much in the dark as he was, we shall give you Van Helmont's declaration, a philosopher of much greater note than this pseudo-chemist Kircher. Van Helmont says, I have divers times handled the stone with my hands, and have seen a real transmutation of falsible quicksilver with mine eyes. No, saleable quicksilver with mine eyes, which in proportion did exceed the powder which made the gold in some 1,000 degrees. It was of the color that is in saffron, being weighty in its powder, and shining like bruised glass, when it should be the less exactly beaten. But there was once given unto me the fourth part of 1 grain. I call also a grain the 600th part of an ounce. This powder I involved in wax, scraped off a certain letter, lest in casting it into the crucible it should be dispersed through the smoke of the coals, which pellet of wax I afterwards cast into the 3-cornered vessel of a crucible upon a pound of quicksilver, hot and newly bought, and presently the whole quicksilver, with some little noise, stood still from flowing, and resided like a lump. But the heat of the argent vive was as much as might forbid melted lead from recoagulating. Okay. The fire being straightway after increased under the bellows, the metal was melted, the which the vessel of Sulcian being broken, I found to weigh 8 ounces of the most pure gold. Therefore, a computation being made, a grain of that powder doth convert 19,200 grains of impure and volatile metal, which is obliterable by the fire, into true gold. For that powder, by uniting the aforesaid quicksilver unto itself, preserve the same at one instant from an eternal rust, putrefaction, death, and torture of the fire, howsoever most violent it was, and made it as an immortal thing against any vigor or industry of art and fire, and changed it into the virgin purity of gold. At leastwise, one only fire of coals is required herein. By which we see that so learned and profound a philosopher as Van Helmont could not so easily have been made to believe that there existed a possibility of transmutation of base metals into pure gold, without he had actually proved the same by experiment. Again, let the standing monuments of Flamel's liberal bounty to the poor through this mean to be seen at Paris every day stand as a testimony to the truth of the existing possibility of transmutation. Likewise, Helmont mentions a stone that he saw and had in his possession which cured all disorders, the plague not excepted. I shall relate the circumstance in his own words, which are as follow. There was a certain Irishman, whose name was Butler, being some time great with James, King of England, he being detained in the prison of the castle of Vilverde, and taking pity on Bellius, a certain Franciscan monk, a most famous preacher of Gallo Britain, who was also imprisoned, having an erysipelas in his arm. On a certain evening, when the monk did almost despair, he swiftly tinged a certain little stone in a spoonful of almond milk, and presently withdrew it thence. So he says to the keeper, Reach this supping to the monk, and how much for soever he shall take thereupon, he shall be whole, at least within a short hour's space. Which thing even so came to pass, to the great admiration of the keeper and the sick man, not knowing from whence so sudden health shone upon him, seeing that he was ignorant that he had taken anything, for his left arm, being before hugely swollen, fell down as it could scarcely be discerned from the other. On the morning following, I, being entreated by some great men, came to Vilverde as a witness of his deeds. Therefore I contracted a friendship with Butler. Soon afterwards I saw a poor old woman, a laundress, who from the age of 16 years had labored with an intolerable megrim, cured in my presence. Indeed, he, by the way, lightly dipped the same little stone in a spoonful of oil of olives, and presently cleansed the same stone by licking it with his tongue, and laid it up into his snuff box. But that spoonful of oil he poured into a small bottle of oil, whereof one only drop he commanded to be anointed over the head of the aforesaid old woman, who was thereby straightway cured and remained whole, which I attest I was amazed, as if he was become another Midas. But he, smiling, said, My most dear friend, unless thou come hitherto so as to be able by one only remedy to cure every disease, thou shalt remain in thy young beginnings, however old thou shalt become. I easily assented to this, because I had learned that from the secrets of Paracelsus, and being now more confirmed by sight and hope. But I willingly confess that the new mode of curing was unaccustomed and unknown to me. I therefore said that a young prince of our court, Viscount of Gaunt, brother to the Prince of Episoi, of a great house, was so wholly prostrated by the gout that he henceforth lay only on one side, being wretched and deformed with many knots. He, therefore, taking hold of my right hand, said, Wilt thou that I cure the young man? I will cure him for thy sake. But I replied, he is of that obstinacy that he'd rather die than drink only one medicinal potion. Be it so, said Butler, for neither I do require any other thing than that he do every morning. Touch this little stone, thou seest with the top of his tongue, for after 3 weeks from thence let him wash the painful and unpainful knots with his own urine, and thou shalt soon afterwards see him cured and soundly walking. Go thy ways, and tell him with joy what I have said. I, therefore, being glad, returned to Brussels, and told him what Butler had said. But the potentate answered, Go, tell Butler that if he shall restore me as thou hast said, I will give him as much as he shall require. Demand the price, and I will willingly sequester that which is deposited for his security. And when I declared that thing to Butler on the following day, he was very wroth and said, That prince is mad and witless and miserable, and therefore will I never help him. For neither do I stand in need of his money, neither do I yield, nor am I inferior to him, nor could I ever induce him afterwards to perform what before he had promised, wherefore I began to doubt whether the things I had before seen were dreams. It happened in the meantime that a friend, overseer and master of the glass furnace at Antwerp, being exceedingly fat, most earnestly requested of Butler that he might be freed from his fatness, unto whom Butler offered a small piece of that little stone, that he might once every morning lick, or speedily touch it with the top of his tongue, and within 3 weeks I saw his breast made more straight or narrow by one span, and him to have lived no less whole afterwards. Before I began again to believe that the aforesaid gouty prince might have been cured according to the manner Butler had promised. In the meantime, I sent to Vilford to Butler for remedy in the case of poison given me by a secret enemy, for I miserably languished. All my joints were pained, and my pulse vehement, being at length became an intermitting one, did accompany the faintings of my mind and extinguishment of my strength. Butler, being still detained in prison, commanded my household servant, whom I had sent, that forthwith he should bring unto him a small bottle of oil of olives, and his little stone, aforesaid, being tinged therein at the times he sent that oil unto me, and told the servant that with one only small drop of oil I should anoint only one place of the pain, or all the places, if I would, that which I did, and yet felt no help thereby. In the meantime, my enemy, according to his lot, being about to die, bade that pardon should be craved of me for his sin. And so I knew that I had taken poison, the which I suspected, and therefore also I procured with all care to extinguish the slow venom, which, through the grace of God favoring me, I escaped. Seeing that afterwards many other cures were performed upon certain gentlewomen, I asked Butler why so many women should be cured, but that while that I sharply conflicted with death itself, being also environed with pains of all my joints and organs, should not feel any ease. But he asked with what disease I had labored, and when he understood the poison had given a being to the disease, he said, that as the cause had come from within to without, the oil ought to be taken into the body, or the stone to be touched with the tongue, because the grief being cherished within, it was not local or external, and also observed that the oil did by degrees unclothe itself with the efficacy of healing, because the little stone being lightly tinged in it, it had not pithily charged the oil throughout its whole body, but had only ennobled it with a delible or obliterable besprinkling of its odor. For truly that stone did present in the eyes and tongue sea salt spread abroad, or rarefied, and it is sufficiently known that salt is not to be very intimately mixed with oil. This same man also cured the abscess, cured an abscess. No, cured an abbess who, for 18 years, had her right arm swelled, with an entire deprivation of motion, and the fingers thereof stiff and unmovable, only by the touching of her tongue with this admirable stone. But very many, being present witnesses of these same wonders, did suspect some hidden sorcery or diabolical craft, for the common people have it for an ancient custom that whatsoever honest thing their ignorance has determined not to comprehend, they do for a privy shift of their ignorance refer the same to be the juggling of an evil spirit. But I could not decline so far, because the remedy was supposed to be natural, for neither words, ceremonies, nor any other suspected thing was required. For neither is it lawful, according to man's power of understanding, to refer the glory of God, shewn forth in nature, unto the devil. For none of those people had required aid of butler, as from necromancy any way suspected. Yea, the thing was at first made trial of with smiling and without faith and confidence. Yet this easy method of curing shall long remain suspected by many, for the wit of the vulgar being inconstant and idle, they do more readily consecrate so great a bounty of restitution unto diabolical contrivance than to divine goodness, the framer, lover, savior, refresher of human nature, and the father of the poor. And these vile prejudices are not only inherent in common people, but also in those that are learned, who rashly search into the beginning of healing, being not yet instructed or observing the common and blockish rules, because they are always wise as children who have never gone over their mother's threshold, being afraid of every fable. For they who have not hitherto known the whole circuit of diseases to be included within the spirit of life, which maketh the assault, or if they hereafter, reading my studies by the way, shall imprint on themselves this moment of concernment of healing. Nevertheless, because they have been already before accustomed from the very beginnings of their studies to the precepts of the humorists, they will easily at length depart from me, and leap back to the favored bigotry and ancient opinions of the schools. But now we will hasten to the manner of preparation necessary to qualify a man for the attainment of the sublime gifts.